And so myself as a supervisor, I would, spend a couple of hours with the spreadsheet, getting everything all ready, assessing how many shifts I need, how many staff I had, how many hours each person has to take. And so, that would take a number of hours in my office with the door closed. And then I would let the staff know, all right, everybody, Tuesday morning at 7 a.m., the first group gets to sign up for call. And I would hide in my office.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now, it's time to roll back and start the first case.
This week on First Case, we speak with James Nideffer, founder and chief clinical officer at orcallstaff.com. James works for Scripps Health in San Diego, California, and during his 20-year nursing career scrubbing and circulating in numerous specialties, he has held positions on staff as a service lead, charge nurse, and operating room supervisor. He created the first website and iPhone app dedicated to learning surgical instruments and is the author of the book Learning Surgical Instruments. He is also the founder of orcallstaff.com, used by hospitals to manage their OR call schedule by allowing staff to access the OR call schedule from their phone or computer. And I'll tell you what, Paul, we're going to talk about just all things call in general. And then at the very end of the interview, we'll talk to James about his solution and how it's making improvements in the industry in terms of efficiency and tracking and really making it a much easier and seamless process for the staff to manage call. But I'd be interested to hear your experiences as we tee up this interview with James with call, both having to manage it and then also managing it for yourself and taking call.
Well, Justin, I was in the OR working actively for over 30 years before going into consulting. And I will tell you that managing the call schedule was one of the toughest things I had to do. There wasn't a day that didn't go by where somebody would come by and complain about having to take call on a certain day or a certain weekend, or that somebody else was getting all the good days. It was always exhausting. And my early days when I was taking call, it was nerve-wracking, it was scary, and occasionally I felt very uncomfortable because I might get called in for a case that I wasn't familiar with. So it was always a challenge. It was horrible having to spend all hours of the night at the hospital at times. And I'm really looking forward to hearing how James has managed to make this solution work so much easier. He's got a lot of experience that we could all learn from.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into this one as well. And there isn't anybody who's listening to this podcast who isn't going to be able to relate to this topic. So we'll be right back after a short break with James Nideffer.
You're listening to the First Case podcast.
Joining us now is James Nideffer, founder and chief clinical officer at orcallstaff.com. And James, this whole topic around managing and taking call, boy, is this going to hit a real sweet spot for anybody with any role in the OR. Really glad to have you on and appreciate you not only sharing your experiences, but also your solution with us today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on the podcast. Call certainly takes up a lot of time and energy for everybody there.
James, you and I have spoken, and you have such a wealth of knowledge regarding call. I think it'd be great for the audience to know a little bit about your background and how you got so involved with call and with starting OR call staff.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. So I've been in the OR since 2001, so almost 20 years. Started off as a staff nurse taking general call, just like, most of us out there who work in a main OR. And then joined a specialty team. I spent a number of years specializing in neurosurgery, taking neuro call with a small team. Actually, my wife was a part of the same call team. So we were a husband and wife duo call team together. And then after that, I joined management. I was a supervisor for a trauma hospital here in Southern California. And so at that point, I was responsible for managing the call schedule. And so I really got to understand what it's like to be on both sides of the coin and how much energy it takes for everybody and what a big impact it has on your life. And so that's where I came to this from.
So having all this good background, you must come into some really interesting situations. I know from my experience, you have the staff who are complaining about having to take call, and then you also have people who are struggling because they want to take more call, and I'm sure you run into a lot of different situations with this. Tell me, what are the biggest frustrations you feel when you're managing the call schedule?
So, call is a huge balance. As a hospital, obviously you have to be able to cover your emergency surgeries. You need to be able to cover your cases that run late and provide all that staffing. And so there's really no way around having a call schedule. It's just a matter of making it fair for everybody. And, how do you have a call schedule and have the staffing you need without burning people out? And how do you, exactly what you're saying, how do you let the people who want to take that call? And how do you provide for the people who want to try and give it away? Because it's really different than just a normal everyday work schedule.
So you talk about burnout a little bit, and I'm curious because it varies across the country and obviously based on hospital size. Do you have a frequency that you recommend that reduces burnout?
Sure. So one of the things with frequency with call that's really going to be very, there's a lot of variability. And so when you have a general call schedule where somebody's coming in for, say, the appendectomies, the hip fracture, they get called in quite a bit. And so they are not going to take as much call as somebody who is on a specialty team, say like a heart team or a transplant team. And so it's going to vary facility by facility. But for the most part, somebody who's taking general call is usually going to spend about a day or two a week on call, hopefully at most. But as you move into those specialty teams where you've got a heart team, you have a transplant team, it's really common for that staff to be on call 50% of the time. And so they really spend a lot of time on call, especially in those smaller teams. And if one of their team members ends up going, out on leave or something like that, it really has a large impact, much, much more so on the specialty teams.
So, James, you were talking about specialty teams. Now, I've been in hospitals where it's just one call crew that comes in for any case, and then other hospitals that have specialty call team for each specialty. What are the pros and cons of that? And how doesn't that make it even more complicated when you have all those different teams?
Well, it's both. Sometimes it makes it more complicated, but it also makes it easier at times. I think that, from the management side, when you have a small facility and you have a small team who's covering everything, it's actually pretty simple for you. Everybody's just got to take their share. For staff, though, I think that can be a lot more anxiety provoking because you don't know what you're going to be walking into. And, so some staff at a small rural hospital, they're coming in for the hip fractures. They're coming in for the C-sections. They're coming in to do GI, and they may be helping out in the recovery room as well. And they don't have the resources. Whereas somebody at a large trauma center who have multiple call teams, that can actually be pretty comfortable just simply because they have so many more resources around them. They have the charge nurse who's there. They have the attendants. They're probably going to be more used to the services that they deal with. And so, it's a real mixed bag, and it really varies facility to facility.
So one of the challenges I remember from working in the OR on a specialty team, I was also worked in orthopedics, and we had a limited orthopedic staff. So when I would come in and do the hip fractures, and there would be 3 or 4 in an evening, and then I was expected to continue working my general shift the next day. How do you deal with those challenges, and what are your recommendations there as far as, what is safe for the staff and the patients?
Well, so just in general, one of the things that we've seen is, the longer that people work, their performance does decrease. And so when you have somebody who comes in on call, whether it's, they've already worked their shift and they're getting called in, or they get called in the middle of the night and they still have to work the next day, as a manager, you want to get that person home so that they can get rested up as quickly as possible. And so ideally, you can flex off that person in the morning if you have the staffing that you're able to do that. Or if you have to have them start maybe the first case and you have your break people coming in, you can relieve them quickly. But it really, really is key to be an advocate for your staff as a supervisor, as a manager, and make sure that they're not getting burned out and they're not in the OR too many hours. But we all know that sometimes, you have to grind it out. That's why we work in the OR. People in the OR, they tend to be the type that want to run towards the fire instead of away from it. And so more often than not, you see people who are really, really willing to work those hours and really work hard. But you always have to look out for your staff.
James, it's a great point. And I think another one to piggyback off of that is the fact that it's still not the same for everybody. And staying in tune with each individual and what they can do and what their capacity is. And Jeremy referenced how much is too much, but also I have to think that age plays a factor as well. Do you see that playing out like this? Is there a certain point where you have to reduce the amount of call just because somebody's been in the OR for so very long?
So some of those questions, and a lot of times we have to sort of default. Each state has different employment laws. And so sometimes some of those issues are dictated by employment laws of the state, where they'll say that somebody can only work X number of hours. Or other times, particularly in hospitals that are union hospitals, there will be a limit to the amount of call that somebody can take or the amount of time that they can spend in the operating room, as well as some of those rules about at what age do people get to cut down on their call. And sometimes it's, hey, you've been in the OR for 20 years and you're over 50 years old and we're going to let you cut down your call. The flip side of that, though, is as a group, we as OR nurses, we are on the older end of nursing. The last study I saw said that the average age of an OR nurse was 48, as opposed to the average age of an RN generally was 40. And so that means that if you start cutting the call for those of us who have been in the operating room for a long time, all of our younger staff, chances are really going to start getting hammered. And that's not who you want to, have such a miserable experience in the OR for, that then they leave and go somewhere else. And so balancing that call and not burning out people is not only really important for patient care, but also, though, it's really key for maintaining your staff and not having turnover and maintaining a quality group of people. I think that that's one of the number one reasons why people leave a main OR and they go and say work in a surgery center is, the call aspect becomes so onerous, even though they have the exact skill set and the desire to work in that main OR. So you really want to balance that, and it's really, really important. But it is really, really tricky to maintain, fairness amongst your staff and also be able to retain the people that you want to when you start allowing people to stop taking the same load as the rest of the staff in the OR.
James, one of the things I've noticed over the years is as the staff get older and they don't want to take as much call, at the same time, there's usually a few people within the department who want to take more and more of the call. So is it fair for them to give away all their call to these other people, especially when, at least from my experience, those people that take all that call end up calling in sick at another time or just end up taking call all the time and not coming in on the regular shifts? Have you seen that occur? And has that been part of your experience?
So we've done some polling around that, and it definitely, is a perceived issue for people calling in sick. They have to stay up all night long and then they end up calling in the next day. So there is a certain amount that happens. But one of the good things though is if you have somebody call in sick, it's not quite as much of an issue because you have your full staff complement, and we expect a certain amount of sick calls. And so you're able to absorb that a little more. The real problem tends to occur when the people who don't want to be taking call in sick for their call shift itself. Because then all of a sudden you're in a situation where your person who's about to go on call has called out and you don't have the coverage that you need. And that tends to be the huge frustration amongst the other staff. And we were looking for examples of how they deal with that, and most of the staff were saying, well, we just sort of have a list. And if somebody calls out, then you get stuck with their call at the last minute. And as we know, people have a lot on their plates at home. They're trying to take care of kids, particularly during the pandemic now when everybody is at home. So everybody's trying to manage children's schooling and spouses, and it's very challenging.
So with the call, in my experience, one of the challenges was the facility I worked at often used their call staff as their extended hours staff. So the cases that were running long, and they utilized their call teams rather than staffing the shifts appropriately. Do you see that across the industry?
Yes. So call tends to be used exactly for a couple of reasons. And one of those reasons is when you don't have enough staffing to cover, whether it's your staffing, just you don't have enough that day and you need to call somebody in from home, or if cases are running over and you need to have the staff stay late. Fortunately, usually people don't mind that too much unless it becomes every single day. But that's when it's really nice when you can have a market system with call where the standby pay is enough that people are incentivized to want to take the call. And then also there's a mechanism that people are able to trade call amongst themselves. And so when you're able to easily swap call and give people the call that they want, that's a great running OR. That means your staff is happy. The people who want to be home get to be home. The people who want to earn extra money, they get to pick up the call. And that's an ideal working environment. And it cuts down on the amount of sick calls that you have. It reduces your staff turnover, and it just makes for a happier staff and happier physicians and better care for patients.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% there. I'm curious, you mentioned earlier the correlation between call and sick leave. Have you been able to establish that there is a direct correlation there?
No, a lot of those things are, they're kind of in the weeds. When people get burned out, usually you don't see it immediately. One of the interesting things, when you talk to OR people, it's sort of a badge of honor sometimes when you ask somebody, how many hours have you spent in the OR? What's the longest you've ever spent in the OR? If you're in the break room and you say, oh, I'm worn out. I scrubbed for 14 hours yesterday. Invariably, you'll have a few other people say, oh, I've spent 17 and I've spent 22. And so that's sort of I think that, that's part of the OR culture is people are just ingrained and really work hard. but that does have a toll. And so sometimes that results in somebody calling out the next day. But, when you work 18 hours and you're scrubbed in a really, really long time, the hit that your body takes from that, it's like jet lag. It's like trying to fly back in from Europe. You're wrecked for a couple of days. And so more often than not, you actually might see somebody call out sick a couple of days later. Tuesday night, they just got creamed and they had to work all day Wednesday and all day Thursday. But Friday for sure is, that's when they're going to catch up. And so it's hard to find an exact correlation. But when you overwork your staff, you're gonna, at some point, it's going to come back to haunt you.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the badge of honor, because I can tell you exactly how many hours the longest shift I ever worked in the OR was, and we do wear that as a badge of honor.
Yeah, exactly. I'm the same way. I can remember the day. I remember the anesthesiologist I was working with, and the only thing that was, is my anesthesiologist, I think, was even more tired than I was. So anybody who's been in the OR, they know the feeling of being exhausted and walking out and trying to figure out whether you want to just crawl into the back of your car and sleep in the parking lot or go home.
I noticed neither of you wanted to put your number out there.
Oh. Mine was 47.
Oh,
wow.
That's pretty good. That's pretty impressive. But I have 72 during the LA riots.
What?
I couldn't go home for 3 days.
Now I have to say my 47 was pretty solid working. There was, I think, a 1-2 hour break that I chose not to go home. Now that's not the longest time I spent in the OR. The longest time I spent in the OR was 7 days, which was during Hurricane Sandy in New York City. I worked at Beth Israel Medical Center, and we were the only facility that had power in Lower Manhattan, so we could not leave.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I want to switch things up for a minute here, because I want to talk a little bit about the other side of this, and that is scheduling call and how hard it is to schedule call, especially when you have people who want to switch all the time that might not have exactly the same skill set, or, you've got maybe a tech that wants an RN to cover for them, or some of those kinds of things that occasionally occur. So how do you manage that? What are your tips in terms of managing that? And I'd also like to hear a little bit about your solution for that too.
Sure. Well, let me start off by, I guess, just sort of painting the picture of what it's like for, an OR supervisor who has to put out the call schedule. And so, the first thing that you do is you put out your staffing schedule. You establish that first. And that's just the regular staffing schedule when everybody's going to come in. And you don't put out your call schedule until after your staff schedule is put out. And usually a staff schedule is put out a couple of weeks before it actually begins. And so one of the things, from the management side is you have a small window to get everybody signed up for call and get that call schedule complete in between the time that your staff schedule comes out and when your actual work schedule starts that first day. And some facilities will just assign call. One of the issues with assigning your staff their call then, though, is you're going to have more trading. You're going to have more need for trading when the staff don't have control over their own schedule. And so they have to sort it out themselves sort of after the fact and trade up. And then the other way is to allow the staff to choose their call, give them parameters, tell them how many shifts they have to sign up for, and then let them do that. And so myself as a supervisor, I would, spend a couple of hours with the spreadsheet, getting everything all ready, assessing how many shifts I need, how many staff I had, how many hours each person has to take. And so, that would take a number of hours in my office with the door closed. And then I would let the staff know, all right, everybody, Tuesday morning at 7 a.m., the first group gets to sign up for call. And I would hide in my office with the door locked, waiting until exactly 7 a.m. And my staff would all be huddled with their pencils out all around the bulletin board, ready for it to go up. And I couldn't put it out a minute before 7. And I couldn't, and if I didn't have it out at exactly 7, they were pounding on my door, wondering where it was. And so right at 7 a.m., I would unlock the door, go out to the staff bulletin board, pin it up there, and try and crawl out from the bottom of this group of people frantically trying to sign up for their call shifts. Some of them in their OR scrubs, and then some of them, in their regular clothes because it was their day off. And staff were coming in from home, signing up for call or trying to get somebody else to sign up for their call. Because obviously, if you don't sign up right away, you're not going to get the call shifts that you want. And then after that, then you'd have to pull it down and go through that call schedule and assess, did everybody take their call? Do I have all of my call shifts covered? And then you'd have to start working your way down the list to fill in those gaps. And so it takes a lot of effort on the side of the management to really make sure that everything is covered. And then it takes a lot of work with the staff just to get in and make sure that they get all of their call shifts that they have to cover and need. So it's sort of like a melee. It's Thunderdome when you're signing up for call.
It almost seems like there's a fairness issue there too. Like who gets to sign up for call first? Who's in that first group versus the second group? So that could be another issue that people would be fighting over. Isn't that right?
There absolutely is. Each hospital has their different rules. Usually call signups will get rotated, so everybody kind of gets a rotation and gets their first pick at call, or they have a smaller group and that group will get their first choice. There are some facilities, though, that just simply it's by seniority. And if you've been there the longest, then you get to sign up for your shifts first. And so, depending on where you are will depend on the rules. When you have staff buy-in about how you work that process, that always makes it so much easier. And so it's really nice when you can, agree with your staff what's fair for them, what works for them, and then go from there.
So you've got some really innovative ways of managing call these days. Maybe you could talk a little bit about it, and so that we can get an idea of how it works.
Well, sure. So, after a number of times of crawling out from the huddle from my staff, as well as managing the call trades, because that's one of the things that you discussed or asked about. After the call schedule's out, right, you have your staff who want to trade call and give it away. And to me, call it's a little more like a marketplace. Some staff who really want to give away their call, they'll even offer up money for somebody to, take their call shift from them. And so there's quite a bit of trading, but you have to manage all that and you have to track it. And so after the call schedule is put out, a decent amount of my time was spent with my staff coming and grabbing the little call change slip. And during changeover, when we were hoping that the room is getting clean and the next case is getting signed up, they're running down to the next room to have the other surgical tech sign off on the call slip. And then they would have to bring it to me. And I, as the manager, would have to sign off on the call slip, interrupt what I'm doing and go and pull down the calendar and make sure that the new calendar reflects that change. And so you just had a ton of time that you were spending making these changes and making sure that everything was in order.
It's so funny that you describe it like currency. It's almost like Bitcoin or like blockchain, right? This alternate form of currency that you trade in. But so when you talk about some of your solution itself that you developed, like what was your primary objective? Like when you first started it, what was, if I could do this, the world would be a better place? So
I not too long ago, I don't even know what podcast it was. I think it was a software podcast, but somebody said, if you're doing anything with a pencil, there's got to be a better solution for it. And which call is exactly that in most ORs. It's, we've been signing up for call probably the same way since the 30s, I wouldn't be surprised. And so there had to be a better way. And so I got together with a few smart software guys and we created orcallstaff.com. And the goal was to make it really simple for the OR management to put out a call schedule, but even easier for the staff to sign up for call from a phone, tablet, anything, and anywhere. So they don't have to come in on their days off and they don't have to worry about the fairness, whether the night staff gets to sign up or the day staff. And then afterwards, then they're able to exchange call and post their call. But all of this is all tracked. And so as a manager, you never have to worry about your call shifts that aren't covered, or you never have to worry about any mix-ups. All the changes are tracked. All the call shifts are right there for everybody to see. And then also all the notifications get sent out. And so instead of me cowering in my office waiting to put up that call schedule, I'm able to do it on my terms. I'm able to set a time and just have it be sent out to my staff, and they're able to click on it, sign up for their call, and the entire process is done in a matter of hours instead of a number of days. So that was the goal, really, to fix it for both the staff side, to help people just have more control over their lives. And so they could take call if they want or give it away if they want. And then as well as make things easier for management, and so that they can spend more of their time, doing the things that they need to do rather than chasing down a calendar that may or may not be still posted in the hallway.
Yeah. The efficiency is something that everybody's always looking for. I think that tracking piece is super valuable, but at the end of the day, it only works. And you described how you made it accessible. And that's probably the big key to the success and making it work, especially with people with all kinds of different comfort levels with technology. So, James, not only do I want to tell you I think you came up with a great solution, but I also want to tell you that you were a phenomenal podcast guest, and you're obviously an avid listener yourself. And if you don't already have a podcast, I can kind of see one in your future. You're all set up for it. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insights and some of your solutions with us today.
Well, it sure is fun talking with you guys. And I think one other, timing is any time you create something new, timing is everything. And actually one of our concerns was, older staff in the OR. So we had a little bit of anxiety, about some of our senior staff and their comfort level with using it. And actually we were really pleasantly surprised with how quickly our senior staff members took to it. We've reached a point where everybody has their smartphones, and so many people are, connecting with their grandkids and doing FaceTime and things like that, that we just didn't find that at all. We found that, people who had been in the OR a long time and weren't necessarily technologically savvy had no problem getting in and signing up. They were very, very motivated to, get in there, sign up for their call, and then also love the fact that they were able to trade it away much, much more easily. Because now instead of having to go out and ask people, with this app, they were able to just post it. And so it was visible to everybody in the department, and anybody could pick it up if they wanted to. And so it's been a real win-win that we've found with both staff and management.
Yeah, I can see where people would be a lot happier with the general experience. And like you said, they can do it on their own terms. They don't have to go in and try to find somebody and try to convince them. And then you're playing some of those politics, which I'm sure still lands. But honestly, again, I just want to thank you so much. This was a phenomenal interview. I bet we'll have you back on again in the future. So thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks so much.
That was James Nideffer, founder and chief clinical officer at orcallstaff.com. And Jeremy, this is just one of those topics. It's total human nature. It just brings out everybody's personalities, and the struggle is real, as they say. And so I love what James has done to try to improve that process. And, we talked about it a little bit as we were wrapping up the interview. There's that tracking piece, which I think is really important, because how many times does a manager hear, well, so-and-so said they were going to do this, and then you end up managing these miscommunications. And I can see where just having that out there, having it on their own terms, and then reducing, a lot of that he said, she said, and that variability, that gray area that management has to deal with. I could see what a weight off a manager's shoulders, how much that would be.
Yeah, Justin, I mean, being on both sides of the coin here from the staff perspective as well as the management perspective, I think I can look back at all of my employee satisfaction surveys that I either filled out or that I read as a manager. They always mentioned call in some form. So this solution really does manage that more effectively and more efficiently, and I think will benefit organizations to a great degree.
Awesome. Well, that's going to do it for this week's show. As a reminder, you can support First Case by subscribing on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. We'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review because your feedback is important to the show. And on behalf of Jeremy and Paul and myself, thank you for listening to this episode of First Case.